The Korean War, a war that lasted from 1950 to 1953, a conflict that only spanned 3 years, yet shaped the present day situation of at least two whole countries. Most wars are started by powerful imperial forces wanting to establish their dominance over much smaller countries, and the Korean War is no exception. In this case, it was North Korea, China, and the Soviet Union who were the bullies of the story. The leaders of these countries fancied the idea of a communist Korean peninsula, leading to countless years of bloodshed, the occurrence of many horrific war crimes, and the end of nearly 5 million lives. But let's backtrack. What actually happened? It all started with World War II. After World War II, Korea was split into the communist North Korea and the capitalist South Korea at the line called the 38th parallel. We won't go into full details of it, but the gist of it is that the US had control of the south of the Korean peninsula and the Soviet Union the north, thus the communist and anti communist countries. The US and the rest of its capitalist friends formed a powerful alliance called NATO, which angered Stalin. Stalin, wanting to undercut this victory for the bourgeoisie, encouraged Kim Il sung to cross the 38th parallel and attack their southern neighbors. Coincidentally, a foreign affairs bill in 1950 failed to pass, meaning that Korea no longer received support from the US, setting up the perfect circumstances for Il sung to strike. On one fateful day in June, North Korea invaded South Korea. This event sent shockwaves throughout all of the East Asian subcontinent, and General McDouglas, a big time American war general who was still occupying Japan post World War II, did not hesitate to launch a counterattack. You see, the 1950s were right around the time when the Red Scare was at its peak. From McCarthy, a major politician who coaxed the West into believing that the oh so dangerous communists had infiltrated all levels of government, led to the emergence of the domino theory, which was the idea that if any communist country is left to its own devices, then it will infect all of its surrounding countries with communism. The US was more paranoid about the threat of a leftist invasion than ever before. Hence, a large 3 year war ensued that had the US coming in to support South Korea and China coming in to support North Korea. However, this big war that cost all of the countries involved the lives of their people, their economies, and most importantly their peace, never truly ended with a resolution. After the threats of nuclear bombs, the countries came together to sign a peace treaty, similar to how the Cold War ended. All countries except South Korea, whose president was hell bent on reunification, signed. A failed treaty means no true end, which means that this fateful war is still going on, with both countries in a stalemate. Now, let's go back to the future. So, you might be asking, there are an insane amount of wars around the world. What makes this one any more special than the next one? Well, don't fret, I'll explain it to you. The Korean War had a huge impact around the world. Lives were lost, nearly 5 million lives to be more exact. Families were torn apart, never to see each other again. Even after the war, many never returned home, being forced to stay in a country that they tried to fight against. And most have never returned due to the broken relationship between South Korea and North Korea. Many, as Un Chin Lee said during an interview with CNN, are living, holding on to the hope that they will someday see those family members that were lost. As well as impacts within the population, it also affected the economy. The war destroyed the majority of Korea's industry, with North Korea falling into a deep poverty, unable to keep up with South Korea's economic pace. This poverty still affects the life of all North Koreans. However, it wasn't just Korea's economy, but also the US's. Taxes were significantly raised to fund their military, which didn't make their own people very happy, as can be expected, of course. And guess what? That's not all, folks. Yes, as well as changing families and economies, this war also changed country relations. Due to the US deciding to remain stationed in South Korea, pressure was put on the Chinese American relationship. The Chinese were not happy, and the US decided to not have any dealings with China anymore. As well as that, the US decided to help rebuild Japan and signed a final peace treaty in 1951, signaling the end of US occupation. On the other side, China and the USSR were having their own series of events. Both were quarreling over who would pay for the war. In the end, China decided that the USSR were unreliable and demanding and distanced themselves as much as possible in the aftermath of the war. The Sino Soviet split, which was China breaking away from the Soviet Union, occurred in 1960, creating tension among all communist powers. The split shaped relations between the two countries until 1989. And last but certainly not least, the Korean War was an important development in the Cold War, as it was the first time that two major influences, USA and the Soviet Union, had fought in a proxy war. And it wasn't the last. It set the precedent for future proxy wars. The Korean War set the stage for the Vietnam War, with the rollback strategy being in place once again. The rollback strategy is a political policy of forcing large changes on rules and regulations of a country, e.g., changing a communist country into a capitalist. So, as you guys can see, the Korean War had major significance in the world we live in today. It shaped the way we look at communism, it changed the economies of major countries, it broke families and relations, and even rolled out the carpet for future wars. So, yeah, history does matter.